Their story began one night on a remote highway in the White Mountains, when the couple wandered off Route 3 and found themselves in the mountains.
September 19th, 1961. My husband Barney and I are in Montreal, and we heard a weather report that a hurricane was coming up the coast and probably would hit our hometown of Portsmouth. So we decided to return to Portsmouth, get there before the hurricane did.
Betty and Barney were on their way home from Montreal. Both had been married before and both had children, but Betty's were adopted since she was sterile.
And this was after the summer tourists, and we knew that the mountains were going to be deserted, facilities would be closed. So we went through customs and we stopped in Colebrook and got gas for the car and had a lunch. So we knew it was about 10 o'clock when we left Colebrook.
Betty was a social worker, and Barney was a postal worker and a member of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. They were both around 40 years old, and neither had any history of psychological problems.
And we're driving down through the mountains when I suddenly saw a new star in the sky. And as I watched it, it became bigger and brighter. And my first thought was, is it a comet going to hit the Earth? So we stopped the car to get out to get a good look at this. And as we did, it passed in front, it changed direction and passed over the face of the moon. And we could see that it had multicolored flashing lights around it. And then it turned and started coming in towards us. So we started driving south. We did this for about 30 miles. And we had no idea what this craft was. We were trying to identify it. And I put the window down and I waved to him and said, "Hi." And about a half mile south, it came out over the highway, midair, and stopped. Now, my husband had been in World War II, so he's going to get out and identify this craft. And he takes the binoculars and he walks towards it. And as he looks up, he sees a group of men standing in a window looking down at him. And at that moment, a fin-like structure parted on each side of the craft and had a red light on the end of the fin, and the craft started to come down. Barney had the feeling they were trying to capture him.
They're gonna catch us away. Let's get out of here, man. Let's get out of here. They're gonna catch us. Let's leave. Let's go.
Disoriented and distraught, the Hills realized where they were when they saw a sign 17 miles from the town of Concord. They had taken 2 hours longer than expected to drive through the White Mountains. The next day, they told the Army what had happened to them. The Army was quite interested, since they had detected an unidentified radar echo over the White Mountains during the same time frame. But there were holes in the Hills story.
In the beginning, we remember seeing the men in the road, but we couldn't get beyond that. And so we would go back there about once a month, thinking if we could find the spot where we saw the men in the road, we could remember what happened. And we were beginning to get little memories back, but nothing too shocking. And then Barney's health failed, and he wasn't responding to medication, so his doctor sent him to a psychiatrist. And one day Barney mentioned how we were going north through the mountains and looking for the spot, and we would find all kinds of people who had all kinds of UFO sightings, but nobody knew where the spot was. So he referred us to Dr. Benjamin Simon in Boston, and we started medical hypnosis.
A week later, Betty began to have nightmares in which she was abducted by aliens. She wrote down her dreams and told Barney about them. Ever since the night of the abduction, the couple had been suffering from health problems. Finally, 2 years after the abduction, the Hills agreed to be placed under hypnosis by Dr. Benjamin Simon. The following are excerpts from those sessions.
I want to wake up.
You're not going to wake up. You're in deep sleep. You're comfortable, relaxed. This is not going to trouble you.
This creature, this leader is telling me something.
How? How's he getting it to you?
I can see it in his face.
Do you see his lips move? Yes.
No, his lips aren't moving. He's looking at me.
What did he tell you?
Stay there and keep looking. Just stay there, he's saying to me. It's
all right.
pounding in my head. Just
all
don't
right.
pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength.
All right.
Pull them down. Run! Pull these binoculars down and run! God!
All right. Calm down. Calm down.
Betty and Barney's testimony is very important, especially since it was the first of its kind. So we know that it was not tainted by media sensationalism.
Les médias racontant des histoires de ce genre, en fait.
And they were treated by a well-known Boston psychiatrist who questioned them separately under hypnosis for a period of 6 months.
Qui les a interrogés séparément sous hypnose pendant 6 mois. Et ils ont raconté
They both told the same story. Betty Hill elaborated more than Barney, but he had been traumatized by what had happened to him.
Simon removed the amnesia so that we could remember clearly all that had happened. They took us on board the craft, their craft, and we were taken into separate rooms. They were very human looking. They had 2 arms, 2 legs. The only difference basically were their facial features. The noses were very, very small. Almost no nose. Small lips, small nose. They examined my eyes, ears, nose, throat, skin, hair, and all. And then I was put on a table where they scraped my skin in an attempt to find out if our skin was alike or different.
Hill says an alien conducted sexual experiments on them. They took semen from Barney. Betty may have had eggs extracted.
He tried to insert a needle-like instrument in my navel, which caused pain, so he stopped doing it. And I was grateful for that.
In her last on-camera interview, the late Betty Hill shared her experience.
My husband Barney and I are returning from Montreal, Canada. We're traveling down through the White Mountains of New Hampshire when we suddenly spot what we thought was a new star in the sky. And as we watched this, it changed direction and came in towards us.
Barney pulled over, grabbed a pair of binoculars, and stepped out of the car to get a closer look at the menacing flying object. Betty Hill's niece, Kathy Martin, was a teenager when this incident occurred.
In another stunning example of Clancy's baseless true believer stance, she repeated in her book the debunker's old red herring about the Hills' abduction, Betty and Barney, in which she asserted that despite their denial, Betty and Barney had watched the sci-fi program Outer Limits before they reported their UFO abduction experience, and that their description of the UFO occupants was formed by the alien figure depicted on the show. That fictional TV image, Clancy said, was, quote, of a big-headed, big-eyed alien who, quote, looked remarkably similar to those of today. They had big black wraparound eyes, no noses or mouths, and delicate, waif-like bodies. Unfortunately for her, another intrepid skeptical investigator, my friend and colleague David Jacobs, located a tape of the original Outer Limits program that she had alluded to. It was called the Bolero Shield, and found that the alien depicted, there was only one, was of normal height, at normal bodily proportions, with deep-set eyes, but quite typical in shape and color. No waif-like body, no big black wraparound eyes. In fact, no resemblance at all to the figures the Hills described.